Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. My guest today on the Online for Authors podcast is Mark R. Anderson, author of the book Sage Among the Pines. Mark, a Fulton Books author, retired after 35 years of distinguished service in the Department of Defense and 10 years concurrently as an officer of the United States Navy Reserve. He completed his most recent book, Sage Among the Pines, while living in Pinehurst. In my book review, I stated I was excited to read this book before it came out on the shelves. Tom and Cynthia, along with their daughter Lexi, have a great life. Until Tom makes a mistake, Cynthia can't forgive him, and no one tells Lexi what is going on. And then, without warning, Tom dies in a military training exercise. As Cynthia spirals into depression, her daughter spirals into adolescent rage. Only a sage among the pines, in the form of a grandfather-grandmother duo, can save them. This is a healing journey, healing from loss and betrayal, as well as a forgiveness journey. It shows how complicated life can become, even when people truly love one another. I enjoyed Mark's book because his characters are real. If you enjoy character-driven fiction, then this one is for you. Today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Mark R. Anderson, author of Sage Among the Pines. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Terry. I'm glad to be here, and I appreciate the invite.
Super excited to have you. Before we really dive into this, why don't you tell the listeners what they're going to get when they pick up Sage Among the Pines?
Well, they're going to get a emotional roller coaster, I think. It's a literary fictional story of a coming of age of a young girl who has to go through a lot of trials and tribulations in her early young life, a few, and then through the help of some caring adults and family, sees how she comes out on the other end.
Right. We met at a festival in Southern Pines, and we kind of bonded very quickly over characters, and determined that your books and my books, though vastly different in many ways, were very much alike in others. So talk to me a little bit about why character is so important to you.
I enjoy character development, mostly because in that endeavor, I am trying to really express and explain the complexity of emotions. And you can't do that when you're talking about a place or a time in history or the storyline. But when you develop characters, you get that opportunity. And for me, that's one of the most fascinating parts of writing, and that's the hardest part for me, is to really try to convey the depth of emotion. And I enjoy that, using the words.
I agree. I tell people all the time that I'm a character-driven fiction author, and that where the setting is going to depend completely on where my character needs to be.
Yeah.
And that if my character needs to be in the past, that's where we'll be. But if they need to be, in the present, that's where we'll be. And if we need to be in a fantasy land, well, then that's where we'll be. It's going to be very dependent on what my character needs to bring out whatever it is that is in them that somehow needs to hit the page.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes their time span or time period and the cultural effects on them also has an impact on the nature of their character and
exactly
their emotions. So you have to, you can't be void of that. You have to include that. But I think it drives how you're developing your character.
Right, exactly. So you've not always been an author, Mark.
No.
Talk to us a little bit about what did you do before and whether or not what you did before has any influence on what you're currently writing.
Sure. I spent 35 years in the federal government working in the Department of Defense. And then at the same time, I spent 10 years as an officer in the Naval Reserve. So I wrote a lot of research papers and topics for policymakers. So I was writing most of my career and doing research.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I retired 7 or 8 years ago, I decided I wanted to write for myself. And because I've always enjoyed writing, again, the complexities of describing emotions and conveying those emotions. So I took that on and just came up with some concepts and ideas that had always been in my mind. And I had a lot of travel experience around the world and going to see new cultures, living among other cultures. And so that came into play in my overall life experiences that end up showing up in some of my writing. My first book, Shadows of Saigon, I had been to the Far East a lot and really enjoyed that part of my travel experiences. And the Vietnam experience was something that my father and my uncle had. So I enjoyed studying that and writing about it.
Right.
This one here, my current book, Sage Among the Pines, is really about, I cover the areas that I live in now in central North Carolina, in Pinehurst area. So there's a lot of history here, and there's some very interesting and exciting areas here that have a lot of culture. There's a lot of horse farm areas, and there's a lot of golf, and there's a lot of social life in this area. So that comes out in my newest book.
So that's something that I want to bring up. A lot of times we're told, like, find your genre and like stick with it. That's what you need to do. And mm-hmm. I don't listen to that. I do my own thing. I've got books in a wide variety of things. And you're doing the same, because your first book, Saigon, I can't think of the rest of the name of the title. Shadows of Saigon is more historical fiction-esque, with it's a contemporary and then looking back kind of book. And then Sage Among the Pines is more of a contemporary, there isn't a whole lot of looking backward in time. So you didn't really follow that, hey, you're a historical fiction author, so stick with it. What made you decide to just write what came to you versus sticking to a genre?
I guess we all have our different methods of coming up with our storylines in our books, and that can shape how the final product turns out, of course. So believe it or not, in Sage Among the Pines, I was trying to capture for the readers, for posterity, all the things that we felt during the COVID time, the hardships, and no toilet paper, no milk, no baby food, not being able to go to the hospital. Humans have a short memory, and it was only 3 or 4 years ago, but I'm sure we've forgotten the feelings that we had during those hard times. And I was going to try to capture that. So I thought about who would that isolation really affect the most, and in my mind, I came up with a teenager, maybe a teenage girl who would really suffer under that kind of isolation that we had to do for almost the first year. Then the story began to develop, and I wrote about my main character, Lexi, and how everything would affect her. And after I was halfway through, the story just stood on its own. I didn't need COVID anymore as my foundation. So I bailed on the COVID part and just let the story evolve, and I came up with the whole storyline. So it really was not based on a historical event. I guess it was. But
then it evolved away from that.
It evolved really and stood on its own, and was, I think, more enjoyable to read without anything to do with COVID.
I think that it's interesting. Then you must be a little more of a pantser where you have like some ideas, but you don't have the whole story plotted out. Is that the way that works? Or did you have it all plotted out and then your characters took over and wouldn't go there?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Okay.
Uh, I'll give an example. I'm working on a third book now, and it also has some historical fictional elements.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a French girl who was, after the Germans left France, she was accused of cavorting with the Germans, and they marched these women out on the street, shaved their heads, and beat them up, and did a lot of terrible things to them. So I'm developing this storyline. I have the whole plot in my head, but as an author, you know that we also come up with some delicious tangents.
Exactly.
Go off the story, and we develop those, and that really enriches the story. And so I'm doing that with this third book, and I did that with most of my others. You get the basic plot line in my mind from beginning story, character development, and then beginning of the plot and the end of the plot. But then there's some rich nuggets that come out on the sidelines, and you start going off in those ways, and it really enriches the story, I think.
Right. So you sound like you're kind of in the middle. You do some plotting and you do some pantsing. You kind of allow, and I'm pretty much a true blue pantser. I often sit down with nothing more than a nugget. Like a character and a general idea. Like when I wrote my last one, Daughters of Green Mountain Gap, I knew that I had a character and she was going to be a granny woman, and I knew I was going to make it generational, and I knew it was going to be in the mountains of North Carolina, and that's all I knew.
Well, I got to say you're brilliant at it, because I read and enjoyed all three of them, and I started with Sunflowers.
Yeah.
And I've read each one as they come out, and they're brilliant. The character development is brilliant, and I really enjoyed all of them. So,
well, thank you. I just start with that nugget, and then I think it was with An Enemy Like Me, I tried to have an outline.
Okay.
Because I thought that the only way to be a real author was to have this outline, and so I had it, and I couldn't write a thing. I mean, I just had no thoughts, nothing. And I almost felt like my characters were lined up against the wall with their arms crossed, tapping their foot, waiting for me to get back to my normal process. Like, as soon as you stop trying to force this, we'll work with you. But until then, we're just going to sit here and not play the game. And I struggled, and then I finally said, okay, this isn't worth it. Put everything away, didn't think about it I probably was thinking about it, but not, and then all of a sudden it was like, ooh, I know what I want to write. It was.
So your characters were alive in your head.
They are. They live in my head. I tell people that I don't really need to be medicated, but I don't think everyone believes me. So
I didn't, we've met a couple of times. I didn't know that about you. I'm not surprised, but all your storylines come together so well. I would have thought that the threads were from finish to end right out of that.
No, and it's interesting. Sometimes I'll have this thought and I'll think, oh my gosh, I can use that thing that I wrote back there in chapter 2. I don't know how. I think that I just have a very quiet subconscious that doesn't speak very loudly to my conscience. And if I get still and let it go, it's got it all worked out, but I don't know it.
Okay.
Like the me that does my life every day is unaware that this subconscious has this whole book in here, and we're just waiting for me to get still enough to let it all come out. Yeah. I don't know.
In the process, it reveals itself to you.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really great. I love that. So tell me a little bit about your characters. You have some grandparents that are very wise, and they really help Lexi. You've got this Lexi is not likable at first. I mean, she is, but she's not. You see why she is the way she is, but she's kind of spoiled and you just think, oh, ugh. Like, come on, dear, take a deep breath and look around you. But knowing that her age and everything else, I mean, you give her some grace. Do you have people in mind? Like, do you know people like Lexi and these grandparents? Did you pattern them off of someone? Or is this like a conglomerate of people? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I think that's more fair to say. I didn't have any one person that I was writing about, as we often do. Sometimes we, all our characters are based on similarities to people in our lives. But no, Lexi was not. I was actually, when I started writing, and I had about 150 pages, I share a lot of things with my daughter, who's she's brilliant. She went to William and Mary, 38 years old now. And she read part of it and she said, Dad, you have to think like a 14 or 15-year-old girl. I said, well, okay,
Good luck.
A challenge. That's a challenge. I'm not sure how to do that. But I did. I started thinking about it and looking at nieces and, people that I've known in my life. And first of all, I think women are very, very strong. They mature faster, and they're just superhuman in the things that they can do. So, and I thought, okay, a 15-year-old or 14-year-old girl has some difficulties in her life already, trying to figure out who she is, and we all know that women can be very, critical of other women, and especially in the high school,
right,
arena. So I was thinking about those things deeply, and looking at some TV characters that they portray, and trying to develop that scenario. And so, she's a very middle-class, entitled, only child person. And so those kind of things come out. And she's a little spoiled and self-centered and living in her own world because her world caters to her.
Right. Right. She lives in her own world because she can.
Yeah.
And we all do that.
Yeah.
Even as adults, you kind of live in the world that you can live in. And it isn't until you're dealt a blow somewhere else that you are shocked into, right? Yeah. And so it's the same thing with teenagers. She just didn't have the tools to know what to do when her world collapsed around her.
She gets them.
Yes, right. And that's...
Yeah. But the other big consideration is that she's also very much a daddy's girl.
Right.
Her daddy's a big, strong Marine, and he just... anytime he can, he spends his life, just being with his daughter and help, mom. She's always with mom, and the things that other daughters do. But daddy's always there too. And so she really relishes, because daddy has some deployments here and there, and he has to go away from time to time. But when he's home, she just cherishes the time that she's with him. Right. So when things happen to dad, it's not good.
Right. It really rocks her world. Yeah. It really rocks her world.
Yeah.
Are you in any of these characters?
No.
No?
No, I wouldn't. I would say, well, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I am actually. I've always had, I've had a lot of training in leadership. Mm-hmm. I have a master's degree in leadership. And so, and through the government, there's a lot of leadership training. So I've developed, I probably could write a couple of books on it. And so some of my philosophies, and I don't want to, say I'm going to stand on my pulpit, but some of the philosophies that I embrace, and I have tried to teach my own children and my grandchildren and my nieces and nephews, are the kind of values that I think help lead to a happier life.
Yeah.
And those things come out in my grandfather character.
Yeah. I wondered because, I do the same thing. I tell people all of my characters have a little bit of me in it. It's either me as I used to be, me as I am now, me as I wish I was, me as I would be if I were, born in a different place. Like I try to imagine me there. Even if I'm writing a 4-year-old boy, I still try to imagine, well, I can imagine me as a 4-year-old girl, and then we can go from there, that kind of thing. So, I wondered how much of you, because in our talks that we've had, I can tell that you have a strength of character. You know who you are, you know what you stand for, you and it's quiet. It isn't, it's not a stand on the counter and rage kind of know who you are. It's just a quiet assurance. And I felt that in the grandfather. And so I wondered if maybe you were part of him. So That's good to know.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was thinking, well, I've never been a 15-year-old girl, so that's
No.
not me.
Yeah, you were focused on the Lexi side, and I was looking at the grandparents'
I'm
side.
sorry.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That's all right.
But yeah, we all want to, I think most people want to teach their children how to live a good life and to be happy. And so, and through experiences, our own experiences, and, I'm in my 60s. I've had a lot of life experiences, especially traveling around the world. Uh, and that's just an invaluable experience that, just seeing other places and other cultures and how people live, that I've tried to share that. I even have a couple of pages of notes that I send to each one of my nieces and nephews when they graduate from high school, saying words to live by. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. That's fantastic. I am going to break this just for a minute and talk a little bit about the fact that we now have a book club that is sponsoring us. And so if you want to keep this book discussion going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. I'm going to have the link in the show notes. As a member of this amazing community, you'll have the opportunity to win a digital copy of Sage Among the Pines by Mark R. Anderson. So head on over, take a look. Find the win it now, and go ahead and sign up, and you might be the winner of Mark's book. So wonderful. Mark, tell me, as a writer, there's a lot of different hats that you have to wear as a writer, and there's a lot of different moving parts. What to you is the hardest part of this whole author journey?
The marketing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The marketing.
Yeah.
As a new author, you just don't have the publicity or the base of the amount of people that you'd like to reach out to.
Exactly.
I'm not a professional golfer. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a political candidate. So those people are a celebrity. They automatically have a huge fan base. And I think for new authors, there's probably some excellent books and material out there that it would be wonderful for people to find it. But
how?
Yeah,
right.
But how do you do that? Right.
Right.
And
right.
Forums like yours are great. And I read your newsletter with interest, because that always introduces some new books and new topics. And that's great. I think I would hope that I would like people to see more of that, and to get exposed to some more material and art. But that's the hardest part for me is marketing and getting out there, and the time that you need to do that. Frankly,
because when you're marketing, you're not writing.
That's correct.
I took a little like hour-long class, and one of the things that was said about marketing, and one of the things that was said is you have to make sure you're balancing it, because if you only write and don't market, then no one will ever see what you write. And if you only market and don't write, you have nothing to market. So you have to have this balance, and it's hard because, like, when a book first comes out, there seems to be a lot more marketing that has to happen. And then you've got this next book in your head, and it's like, how do we find the time to do that? And one of the things they said that I really loved was you find one thing you'll do every day for marketing. And it doesn't have to be the same thing every day, but something every day towards your marketing. And once that's done, you can mark that off and go back to your writing. So, make the one phone call, sit on the one podcast, reach out to one blogger who might do your review, those kinds of things. Do one. And then you can say, I'm done marketing today. Now, if you want to do more, that's great. But if you do at least that one, you're constantly moving forward in your marketing. So
I need to be so much better at that. I mentioned, my opinion of women and how strong they are. And that's one of the things, is that women can multitask very, very well. I'm just a single kind of focused kind of person. I could do one thing and I have to finish it, or else it won't get finished before I move on to the next thing. So that's exactly what you described. You have to do just one thing at a time.
One thing to go do that one thing. Yeah. And you're right. It is really hard when you're trying to juggle all the many balls. And then just to make things fun, I keep adding more balls. It's like, oh, let's see how many things can I write at the same time. Let's throw a podcast in there. Let's, yeah. So
one time I just, looked into your newsletter and saw the things going on in your life. And I just,
yeah, well, that's the way it is. So you were telling me real briefly about this next book that you're writing. How far along are you? Do you have a title? Do you know when it's coming out?
No, I've had a few health problems with some back issues. So, and I was in a lot of pain, and I actually just was not in the mindset to continue writing. But I've got about 150 pages into it. I've done the historical research, and I'm thinking that the title would be something like the La Femme Revanche, which means in French, the woman's revenge. But I would suspect that probably by this time next year, I'll have.
That'd be great.
Product. Yeah,
that would be great. Wonderful. And do you self-publish? Is that correct?
No, I go through a couple different types of hybrid publishers.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And do you think that's what you'll do with this third book is hybrid again? Or do you think that you will go and try self, or will you look for an agent, or where do you see this one going?
Yeah. I
don't know. That's what your answer is mine. Yeah.
I think the golden ticket for authors is to get a literary agent, find someone that enjoys your reading and will support you and encourage you. And through the literary agent, they present you to, the big name publishing companies, which then they have the means and the resources to do all the marketing, which really gets the
what's interesting though is I'm hearing from people who have gone with some of the big ones with a literary agent, and they're not doing as much marketing anymore, and it still falls on the author. So times are changing. That's
well, because authors now have a lot of different options. You can self-publish, through KDP and some of the other Amazon venues and other programs, or you can go through the many hybrid publishers. There's also a lot of different months during the year when certain big houses will take on, new manuscripts.
Right.
So
and there's a lot of very small presses, not the big ones, but the small presses that don't require a literary agent between you and them that you can go out and reach out to. So they're, a smaller press. They don't take as many books during the year, but you don't have to have that middleman between you. So you're right. There are a lot of options. And really, marketing has, though it's difficult and it's a whole new thing to learn, it's become much easier to do. You can do it here at your home with your computer with a couple of simple programs. Like you can create your own graphics and you can do these kinds of things. Whereas 20 years ago, you really couldn't. If you didn't have the proprietary apps and things, you couldn't create the type of stuff that you can do now. I mean, people create their own book covers and they create their own, social media posts and all of those things that used to require someone in marketing.
Yeah. That sounds like something from the brilliant mind of Terry M. Brown, who was able to do that. This nugget up here,
but what I'm saying is like there was a time where like creating a website was it required someone who understood HTML. Yeah. And now they have, I call them like idiot sites where you just go in and you say, okay, I want my picture here. Oh, I see. I click here where it says picture. I upload it and look, it put it right where I wanted it. Like it's a whole different thing than it used to be. So
it definitely made it easier for sure.
Yeah. So as an individual, you have a much greater shot at learning some of these skills if it's something you choose to do. Whereas, 20 years ago, marketing was very much done by a marketer.
Yeah.
There weren't really very few options. And so, Yeah, I think it's really changed kind of the landscape of everything.
It was a big surprise for me after I started writing through and going through. I wrote and approached a couple different publishing companies, and it wasn't difficult for them to pick up my manuscript and say, yeah, we like this. I was pretty confident in my writing at the time. But then after the publishing was done and they said, okay, now let's look at the marketing. And I was just thinking, well, how about you look at the marketing? They said, no.
No, that's not what
Yeah,
happened.
and you too. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there was Old Stone Press and then Fulton Books, this last one. Same thing.
Right.
You have to do a lot of your own marketing too. And I'm just a novice at that. I wish I was better.
So when Sunflowers Beneath the Snow came out, it came out in January of 2022. Mm-hmm. And on the day that it came out, I opened my computer and I waited to see sales happen.
Yeah.
Of course, that did not happen. No one even knew I had a book. And very quickly I realized, oh my gosh, I am behind. I should have been saying something and I don't even know what or how. And so I just started listening to all kinds of marketing podcasts and reading, and everything that I learned that I felt like I could do myself right away, I just started doing. And I tell people I throw things at the wall, see what sticks. And if it works for me, then I just keep doing that. And yeah, it's been a crazy ride. I knew nothing about marketing 2.5 years ago. Nothing.
Wow. Well, you're your newsletters and the podcasts and something you're really coming up in the world with that. It's good.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out as I go. That's for sure.
I'm still waiting for some, Hollywood writer. I've got my phone right here, waiting for a Hollywood writer to call me and say, "Hey, we saw your book and
me too." In fact, I tell people all the time, if you know Oprah, if you know Reese Witherspoon, if you know Jenna Bush,
right,
contact them. Let them know about our books. We're great. And then bam, they'll become immediate bestsellers. And then, we'll be having a different conversation, Mark.
And let me know, because I'll just tag on with that.
Okay, that sounds good. Same here. Okay, we got a deal going. All right, Mark, if someone wanted to get in touch with you and talk with you about the books that you've written or the one that you have coming up, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, I have my own personal email, but I don't give that out. I'm sorry. But fultonbooks.com has a site set up where they can reach out and I can answer questions. I'm also on Goodreads, and there's a couple other sites. I'm working on getting one of my daughters, who is here, to kind of be a site manager for me. But we're still very conscious of some of the scams and other things that come across the
you do have to be careful
internet. And so we're sort of careful about that. And I still, having a background in DoD, I still guard my privacy very carefully.
So my husband spent 25 years in the military, and he has a Facebook page that he never posts on. And he's there so that he can see things that his children and grandchildren post.
Yeah.
And that's it. He never posts a thing there. In fact, when he and I started dating, my son contacted me and said, "Oh, you can't keep dating him." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "He's a ghost. He doesn't exist anywhere. I can't find him." And I started to laugh, and I said, "Yeah, that's what 25 years in the military will do to you." So
it is the mindset. That is the mindset, and I've never had a Facebook page. My daughter does. And so I've tried to encourage her to help me in that regard. She does some other things, some online fan page stuff. And I say, well, I'm going to get you to help me one of these days. And we're still negotiating that prospect.
Well, super.
But,
well, I will have the links in the show notes. So to the Fulton Books and other places like Goodreads that they can reach out to you.
Okay. I wish I had more. That's very contradictory to the marketing, trying to get the marketing out there. But
I'm going to encourage you to get a website up, because it can be a pretty simple, easy, straightforward thing. So you and I will have another conversation at another time. Okay, Mark? Right. Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much. Yeah. I want to thank you so much for being on today. I enjoyed speaking with you. If you read Sage Among the Pines, and I recommend that you do, it's a great book. Make sure you go onto Amazon and leave those reviews. As authors, we love them.
Yeah, the reviews are very important for authors, and we encourage it. And Terry, thank you so much. I do enjoy your reading, and when the once a year chance we have a time to meet, I enjoy that.
So do I.
Thank you
This
so
has
much
been great.
for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.